In this video, I intend to explain the fundamental causes of economic crises, such as the recent global recession, and why these are inherent to the current economic system. In order to understand the causes of economic crises, we must first understand the current system of production. Within the current economic system, the only objective in business is to maximize profit, where profit is the total income known as the revenue minus expenses for wages and other costs. This means that workers are always paid less than the total value of the goods and services they produce, because if they were paid the same amount to produce the goods as the businesses sell them for, then the businesses would make no profit. For example, workers making shoes might be paid $1 per pair they produce. Meanwhile, the wholesaler sells them for $2 per pair, and the retailer sells them for $10 per pair. This means that in the end, the workers must produce 10 pairs of shoes for every 1 pair they can afford to buy. It is this gap between the productive capacity of society and the purchasing power of the majority of workers which leads to the economic crises, as masses cannot afford to purchase all the goods that are being produced at profitable prices, and so the goods are not sold and the economy grinds to a halt. This is known as a crisis of apparent overproduction, because according to the business owners, it looks like too many goods have been produced, although in reality the people may be in dire need of these goods but simply lack the means with which to purchase them. This covers the basics, but I think the idea is better explained with an analogy called the parable of the reservoir. Long ago, a society lived in an area of severe droughts, and a great amount of work was expended in gathering water from streams to drink from. One day, a worker realized they could build a reservoir in which to store the water and so relieve the people of a great amount of work. However, the stone necessary to build such a reservoir was all privately owned by the capitalists. For just as in our society, the land and natural resources were privately owned by capitalists. So, he agreed to turn over the plans in return for some money with which he could buy food from the capitalist farms. The capitalists then hired workers to build the reservoir, and despite the capitalists doing nothing to construct the reservoir itself, took ownership of it after construction. The capitalists then said to the people, "You need no longer suffer, you can drink from our reservoir and we'll even hire you to fill it for us. However, due to the great investment we've put into the reservoir, we must make a profit from it. We will pay you $1 for every bucket of water you fill it up with, and we will charge you $2 for every bucket you withdraw from the reservoir." The people were relieved and praised the capitalists for their efforts, as they believed they finally obtained a steady source of water. However, because the workers must put twice as much water into the reservoir than they could afford to withdraw, the reservoir was soon overfilled. The capitalists then said, "We have produced too much water, and your employment is no longer profitable." So they stopped hiring people to fill the reservoir. Meanwhile, they used the excess water in great baths and fountains for themselves, whilst hundreds of workers died of thirst, for they could not afford the water from the reservoir without the income for filling it. Eventually the reservoir was depleted, and it became profitable once more for the capitalists to hire people to fill the reservoir. However, it would only soon become overfilled again. The capitalists looked at these crises and were worried by their loss of profit, and even more worried by the unrest amongst the suffering unemployed workers, some of whom threatened to take communal control of the reservoir, saying that only this would put an end to the needless suffering. So the capitalists said the crises are unavoidable and a natural part of business, and we suffer as much in our loss of profit as the working people do in their loss of employment, and they hired economists to tell them it was so. And so the needless suffering persisted, for even those who disbelieved the hired tongues of the economists could not overcome the hired swords of their soldiers, and the majority of people simply believed that the crises were natural, and never questioned their basis at all. In this analogy, the water represents the goods and services, and the reservoir represents the capitalist management of their production and distribution. The fundamental problem of this system is the private ownership of the reservoir, that is, the land, resources and instruments required for the production of goods and services. Such great power should never be concentrated in the hands of a few, and it is the resulting wealth concentration which causes the economic crises. As you can see, it is the private ownership of the means of production, and the subsequent need for private profit in production and employment, that leads to the gap between the capacity for production and the capacity for consumption. This analogy is a simplification, for it only considers one sector of work, but so long as the pyramid structure of employment exists, whereby the vast majority of people are employed in producing goods and services for which they are not paid the full value of, then it is still applicable. Even now we see the luxury market faring well. for the wealthy retain the purchasing power to create a profitable market, whilst millions of working people must constantly struggle and work to meet even basic needs due to their lack of purchasing power. And so this system serves the wants of a privileged minority before the needs of the majority, no matter how dire these needs may be. Recently, the capitalists tried to alleviate such crises through easily available credit to increase the purchasing power of the masses. However, this also collapsed as the debt is not profitable when the debtors can never pay it back. All such measures simply postpone the crises, so they do nothing to resolve the inherent gap between the capacity of production and consumption in society. So this is the real cause of economic crises. They are not caused by government intervention, bad weather, or sudden epidemics of laziness, but by the capitalist mode of production itself, which creates this gap between the productive capacity of society and the consumption capacity of the masses. To put it in a phrase, capitalism is the crisis. The crises are not external forces acting on the economic system, but are inherent in the system itself. The only real solution is to take the Earth's natural resources into communal ownership, for they are the product of no one's labour and have simply been taken by force by the capitalists over the centuries. When the resources have been collectivised, no longer will the privileged minority of capitalists be able to live off the toil of the dispossessed majority of workers. With the natural resources and the means of production in common ownership, there is no longer any need for private profit from employment, and so we can provide employment for all people, whilst automating as much work as possible in sharing the products, and so relieve the work burden on all. This is a far cry from the current system of simultaneous overwork and unemployment. In a word, the solution is socialism. Socialism aims to abolish the private ownership of the Earth's land, natural resources and the means of production, such as factories and farms. It aims to abolish these claims of ownership from titles, used only for the purpose of profit, such as rent for a landowner, and the gap between wages and the value of goods and services produced, which is claimed by the capitalist business owner. This should not be confused with personal possessions used for their own utility, such as a person's house or car. To put it simply, socialism is about using the communal resources of the earth for the communal benefit of all. So please, help to put an end to this needless misery and poverty, and support your local socialist party. To find a party in your nation, visit www.socialistworld.net and select your continent and country.